Light the beam. It's time for Nerdy for 30, the podcast where we talk about nerdy movies for 30-ish minutes. My name is Kevin Bauer, aka The Critic's Choice. With me, as always, is the People's Champ, Tim Keck. And today, we are talking about one of our most requested movies of all time, I think behind only Bahubali. This is Sardar Udham. We both just watched this movie a couple days ago. Tim, what did you think?
This is a good movie. This is undeniably a good movie. The subject matter is poignant and beautiful and powerful and horrible. And I feel like I learned a lot. I actually did so much Googling like after this that I probably immediately forgot because I have a cold. But I mean, it explored ideas in history that I really wasn't aware of. I feel like I'm better off having watched this movie. All that being said, this is not what our podcast does. We do fun trash. This is not fun trash. This is a good movie. We watch one good movie once a year, and it's whichever one wins Best Picture at the Academy Awards. We can't just be doing good movies. I mean, I was like busy week at work, like just looking for some fun escape. And this is some heavy shit, man. This was heavy. This got me. It was like 3 hours. It was just, the vibe was off for me, man. And it's all coming from me. This was not my vibe. This is not what I wanted. I say all that while recognizing that this is an incredible movie. And I learned a lot. I mean, my life is better. We've talked about tiers, and I think this is clearly in the good movie tier, like a step above. Like, this is definitely in the good movie tier, the Academy tier. And there's also, I think, a tier where it's not good necessarily the Academy tier, the good movie tier. There's a tier where I'm like, oh, I'm better off after watching this movie. Like, oh man, what was the one that won the Academy Award 2 years ago that we did with the
Coda.
Coda.
Yeah.
Coda's one that I don't even know if I'd say it's a good movie, but I feel like I learned so much and my life is better off having seen this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm going to watch it again, but I'm glad I watched it. And this falls in that same category for me. Well, no, it's a better category. This is definitely a better movie than Coda, but it does have that vibe to me of like, oh, I learned so much. I wasn't aware of this. Has me questioning, geopolitical everything. And I want to get into it, but yeah, this is not the vibe. We can't do this again, Kevin. I refuse. I just won't do it again. I'm glad everybody recommended it. This is probably a recommendation that we should have taken personally and then not potted about. But what am I going to say? What am I going to make jokes about this movie? I don't want. What am I going to say? I've got them. I don't want to say them though.
Oh my
I've got jokes. I don't want to joke. What am I supposed to say about this? What do we say about this movie?
That's going to be our first Patreon, is to get you to release the jokes, but everybody who paid for it, it says something about you because you shouldn't have.
What am I supposed to say about this movie, Kevin? It's not, I want to rip into, Vin Diesel or make fun of some comic book. This is just a lot, Kevin. This is too much.
Hey, I texted you. I was like half hour into the movie, and I texted you, and I was like, Tim, I don't think this is an action movie.
You said this and put it on the calendar, and I'm like, cool, of course we're gonna do it. And I was like, I don't actually know what this is. And I looked at it, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I texted you like, are we really doing this? Is the movie we're doing? And you're like, yeah, man, it's great. And I sent you the link to Amazon Prime, and I'm like, this is like on Amazon Prime. I'm like, wait, this is the movie we want to do? And you're like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, I guess maybe he knows something that I don't. And if you read the synopsis, there's a chance it's trashier than, but it's just like a really high. It's too good a movie for us, Kevin. It just is. Sorry to cut you off.
No, it's an extremely good movie. This was incredibly well shot, incredibly well acted. It was arresting. It made me think a lot about my relationship to biopics, because we talked about that after we saw Oppenheimer, and I have a lot of issues with the hero worship in Oppenheimer that I don't have issues with in this movie. You really, I mean, it really goes out of its way to show you this guy's life as a human being and everything that happened that drove him to that. I hesitate to even say radicalization because it's not. It's interesting. This is not something, you brought this up as well. This is not something as Americans we ever learned about. I remember being in high school and asking one of my history teachers, what was going on outside of America in a lot of the 20th century. And I was told, and I quote, "Don't worry about it. You'll cover it in college if you take any history classes there." And I didn't because it wasn't required for my major. So that's something that I'll talk about later. That's a personal project that I have going on. It's just trying to fill in these gaps. So this was an extremely helpful movie in reaffirming that these massive gaps exist. These challenges that people face, these awful, horrible events that happened in the history of other countries that we're just never informed about. So it did require a little side research what was going on because I had to familiarize myself not just with the characters and events that we were being shown, but also the background leading up to those events. And there were a few things I had no idea that Indian independence wasn't accomplished until 1947.
Yeah.
I thought it was in like the 1800s. Totally ignorant.
It's crazy. It's also crazy that, I mean, I got a 4 on my AP World History exam. Didn't know any of this stuff. Didn't know a thing.
World history. I love it.
My World History exam. And just, I know anything about this. I think I would have responded to it differently if it was something like Lincoln or Martin Luther King, or I just feel like, there's movies about American heroes that we have some familiarity with. And I think halfway through the movie, I was just like, I paused it and I was like, I have to Google this. I just have to know what's happening. And I think if I had, normally my policy with movies is like, know nothing going in. And I think I would have really benefited from having some history with this history of India because I had none. And it's crazy. It's mind blowing stuff, man, to be thinking about. And I guess it's us in our American bubble, but like, the idea that they're getting independence in the 40s is crazy. The fact that they're fighting in World War II as like, I don't know, modern day slaves to the British Empire. There was a moment where they're torturing him where I'm looking at the British guys and I was like, oh, these are like our heroes, like this is James Bond. This is Mission Impossible. This is whatever, MI16 or whatever. Like we're used to seeing British dudes interrogating somebody and looking at them as the good guy. Yeah. I don't know when that happened. Like the British were our enemies for a long time. They were villains forever. And then all of a sudden something changed and now we give a shit about what Meghan Markle's doing. Like it's crazy. I know so many people who like care about the king and queen in Britain. And it's like, why do we give a shit about these people who have done terrible, terrible things? And then you're like, well, the United States done terrible, terrible things. Why do people treat us with any respect at all? And it's like, no, they shouldn't, like, and then you're like, oh, so this guy assassinated this dude, but is this an act? They're calling it an act of terrorism, but for him, it's retaliation for this guy killing so many of his brothers and family. And it's just so it just completely complicates the very whitewashed and sculpted view of world history that I think we're all fed in the United States in general, probably. But certainly looking at my education, just huge gaps in what I've learned about world politics and a lot more nuance to all this stuff than I ever thought.
Definitely. It's so interesting to briefly bring this conversation back into the realm of what we normally talk about on this podcast. It's interesting to me that the take on the Avengers that served as the basis for so much of what we've now gotten for the MCU was a comic series called The Ultimates from around the year 2000 that was helmed by Mark Millar, who's a prominent comics writer who is Irish, I believe. right? And it really focused on the idea of the Avengers being a superhero team that is basically folded into the military industrial complex as a reflection of what the United States was doing in the aftermath of 9/11 in the real world. And I don't know that we would have gotten that from an American author. It's really interesting to me that he was in that place at that time and put out that product that was definitely more sophisticated. It was operating on levels that I could not see as an 11-year-old reading it, but then has gone on to be so influential to all the different comic book series that we've seen since, for better or for worse, for understanding that message or for not. And also, I think pretty much accidentally serving as the basis for the MCU, which then is now actually sponsored by the United States military when they're doing collaborations. I don't think that was on purpose. So it just goes to show what happens when you view pieces of world history through the lenses that are not the lenses that you're used to seeing it through, which I think celebrates the power of film.
I think it does. I mean, history is written by the winners, right? So we don't even, as crazy as it sounds, I haven't spent any time learning really about India and how they've had to deal with British imperialism. I mean, that was like a line in a textbook or something. I don't know. Just I feel very ignorant seeing all this stuff. To go back to the nerdy for 30 theme, the first thing I thought of was Civil War, which is a huge Marvel conflict. And so in this history, the British invade India, to really dumb it down to the way I could understand it. British invade. India's like, why the fuck are you invading us? And they start protesting because of course they will. They were invaded by the British. And then they're meeting peacefully, and the British come in and just kill hundreds of people peacefully, chilling out in a courtyard, and they massacre everybody there. And then there are no consequences for the British soldier general that did this. Nothing. They're awarded as a hero in Britain. People are holding them up like, yes, this guy's right. They're going to see speeches of him talk about the Indian people. And then this guy who witnessed it went to the UK and killed him. And in my mind, it makes complete sense. Why aren't there consequences? But why aren't there consequences for these guys who are doing bad things? It reminded me of the Sokovia Accords, right? Where they want all the superheroes to register, right? As basically join the government and be controlled and have some sort of oversight, right? And yet Captain America is on the side of, no, we should be working autonomously and we should have no allegiance to the government. Captain America, who is always right and encapsulates the American spirit, is fighting for no accountability. And and to push it to an extreme that it will never go, because Captain America is a character and he's perfect and wonderful. He wants the power to go into another country, maybe murder a bunch of people and come back and have no consequences, right? On some level, you can push it out to those extremes. Whereas Tony Stark is like, we need accountability. Somebody needs to control us. If we mess up, we should be doing something. And I think in America, we love this idea of like autonomy and just being able to do what you want, to being a gunslinger and interrogating
cowboys,
people.
Baby.
And we want to be cowboys. Americans grow up with cowboys and Indians, and we never think about the Indians and how the cowboys just rolled in and started shooting them up. We all want to be cowboy. Like every American wants to be a cowboy. And
I mean, it's right there in even what we're taught as kids of cowboys and Indians, calling them Indians and hundreds of years, not acknowledging them as Native Americans. And to this day, crazy. Also, on what you were talking about with the massacre, still no formal apology issued by the British government.
Then what's going to happen? What do they do if the politics of that is interesting, but then we'll never do it? They can't. Like, does America apologize for any of the stuff we do? We've assassinated leaders of countries, and we don't apologize for that shit. You can't admit you did something because, I don't know. That's politics. I don't know. It's not fair. I don't know. Also, what does an apology mean? Why there's some part of my brain that also doesn't understand, like, this guy murdered people. He murdered people. He was in the military. He murdered
Dwyer, you
people.
mean? Yeah.
Dwyer murdered people, and then there was a commander above him.
They both. So O'Dwyer was the guy who issued the order, gave the call, but Dyer was the guy who was actually on the ground and actually.
Okay, that was confusing because the guy who was on the ground died, right? He went to his grave.
Right.
So the guy above him, who he was working for and all of that. Yeah.
That's the guy that Udham assassinated.
Yeah. But he killed a bunch of people, a bunch of innocent people, and then he's assassinated. And some part of me is just like, you know, we should all be good. Even the British should be like, yeah, man, he got what was coming for him. Like, we'll just let this guy go. You know, like, why are they? And then they're interrogating this guy, and they got to find out what else is going on. And I feel like it's very cut and dry. If somebody assassinates someone, I mean, it'd be like if, God forbid, it sounds like a domestic abuse thing, right? Like if some guy hits his wife and then her brother kills him. It's like, well, you know, he did the bad thing and he got what was coming to him. And I guess in America, we lock up the guy who killed somebody, but still there's some sense of justice that just isn't being satisfied. This guy killed innocent people. He died. I think it's fair. At the very least, it's fair.
Absolutely. I think it's really telling that in real life, the speech, this is one of the things I looked up after, the speech that Udham gives in the courtroom, the records of it were sealed for 50 years. They released it to the public in 96. And all he's basically saying is exactly what you just said of like, we are not free. Like, we are still living as slaves. And if you had any ounce of decency, you would realize what you're doing. And the fact that they're like, oh, we can't let people read this. This makes us look really bad. I mean, it kept making me think, the British government in this kept making me think of that old Mitchell and Webb sketch where they're playing Nazis and they look at each other on the battlefield and they're like, wait a minute, are we the bad guys? Like, look, we're dressed in all black. We've got skulls on our helmets. I think we might be the bad guys. Like that level of self-awareness, it's like you just gotta, that like blind allegiance to the country. It's the kind of thing that you just hope that you as a person have done enough work on yourself to recognize if you are put in a position where you have the choice to or the choice not to perpetuate that sort of blind allegiance. And you just hope that you have learned well enough in your life to not just blindly accept this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think this is a whole can of worms and the whole political. I mean, it's a huge political debate in our country now, right? It's just, you know, are all cops bastards, or are there just bad apples, or are there just, why aren't they punishing people that aren't? Why are they protecting people that do bad things? I mean, policing in this country is a great example of that. Patriotism in this country is a great example of that stuff. You know, sports leagues were paid by the government to start singing the national anthem at sporting events. Mm-hmm. And it's part of propaganda that indoctrinates us to feel some prides that when an army recruiter tells us he can pay for our college and all we have to do is not die for 4 years, we're like, wow, that's a great opportunity. I mean, it's what does watching somebody throw a football have to do with America? Like, nothing. It has nothing to do with it. But we've been ingrained to think this stuff. And I think on top of that, at the end of the day, I think everyone's just trying to get by. You know, mm-hmm. I think most people on the planet are just trying to survive and do the best they can. And then there's people at the top who are controlling everything and backstabbing and manipulating. And they're just playing us all against each other. And, you know, in a vacuum, I don't think these soldiers, if they weren't told to, I don't think they would be caring about, you know, suppressing. And I think they'd probably all get along, you know. I'm sure there's, I don't know what I'm talking about. I got a cold. Yeah, my brain's foggy.
Like in a world in which they were not soldiers under the British regime, like if they had not, like not as they existed in actual history, right? Like you're saying, right. Like, yeah.
I think all this stuff is like really played against us by to be as conspiratorial as possible. I don't even think it's a conspiracy but that our government manipulates us into feeling certain ways and to perpetuating, arguments about things and accuse our neighbors and disagree with people because of the way they look or the way they sound or what God they worship. And all that's a distraction for them to just, get fat and rich and do whatever the fuck they want. They don't give a shit about us. The British, it's crazy how many of them didn't even blink at, hundreds of people being massacred. But then at the same time, Jon Stewart has to go before Congress in order to fund the survivors of 9/11. Right. Mm-hmm. Like the first responders to that, a fucking comedian has to go in front of our government and ask them to help these heroes that they've been, who knows? They've been selling flag shirts left and right because of these guys. And now we won't help them, survive this cancer that was directly result of breathing in all these toxic fumes on a terrorist attack. That was a day we'll never forget until it's budget time. And then we forget it. Like, I don't know. My therapist says I got to stop worrying about all this stuff. I got to just focus on what I can control. And there's a victory in that. But, it's hard to watch this movie and not, see all of this as like a reflection on our government, our country and everything. I don't know. This was not the vibe I wanted this week, Kevin. I wanted to chill. I wanted to just goof off and fucking chillax, get a little back massage thing going while I'm watching, Captain America punch somebody. Like this was heavy, man.
Now you're never gonna look at Captain America the same way.
Never. That bastard Captain America. You're bullshit. But yeah. The character of Captain America, you want him to have autonomy because you're like, this guy's a hero. But we put all these people into position. I'm just rambling, Kevin. You got to cut me off and talk about something else.
Oh boy. I wasn't prepared to cut you off. Let's see. Heard an anecdote recently that so I was listening to a series about the Vietnam War, and they were talking about how while the Vietnam War was going on, studios were really reluctant to take any kind of a stand on the Vietnam War. So this is American film studios were extremely reluctant, and different people were making movies with different takes on the war itself. But one way that people ended up getting movies made that commented on the Vietnam War was by making them not about the Vietnam War. So I still haven't seen it, but the original movie version of MASH was created, and it was set during the Korean War and was very much a commentary on what was going on in Vietnam. But the studio was so worried that people would see that they forced them to put in location title cards specifying that this was in Korea during the Korean War, lest people assume, oh, this is the war that's going on right now, and start to get ideas about the Vietnam War.
Right.
So that made me think about what you were saying about how media is a reflection of what's going on. And obviously, like what we've been talking about, the idea that seeing these things, it puts ideas in your head. It makes you think about things in a way that you hadn't before when you're seeing things from a different perspective. And it's interesting to me, this movie came out in 2021. I think it's interesting. So many people, my God, so many people made the Oppenheimer comparison because of AI. They were saying, oh, Oppenheimer is really Nolan's reflection on AI. I think Oppenheimer is Nolan's reflection on the fact that Robert Pattinson gave him a book about Oppenheimer and he really liked it and wanted to make it a new movie. And he's a guy that gets to make movies. But maybe somewhere in the back of his brain, he was thinking about AI. I think it's probably more of a commentary on what it's like to be a director and put things out there. I also personally like to read that it's about his culpability for creating the superhero genre by making
that's the best
Batman
take of
Begins,
it.
The Dark Knight. But yeah, Sardar Udham coming out in 2021, it makes me wonder what other things are happening in India that we are ignorant to that make this. It seems like this was a huge hit. And like I said, this is like, I think it's only behind Bahubali in terms of people recommending this to us. So it seems like it was like an absolute smash hit movie. And I don't know, it makes me wonder what it's resonating with there. What else is happening?
Why wouldn't it? This guy's a hero. Which is crazy because if you're looking from one perspective, he's a terrorist maybe, but from the Indian perspective, in the perspective of this film, he's standing up for his people who have been enslaved by the British government for way too long. I mean, they shouldn't. They should be free. Why the fuck does Britain? Britain is so fucking. I mean, there's a lot of people in Britain, but it's like the size of what, Portland and all, or Oregon, and they just think they can take everything. Like, what's wrong? Like, fuck the British. You know, I'll say it. I'll say it here, and I'll say it now in 2023, year of our Lord. Fuck the British. I don't care about the Queen. I don't care about the King. I don't care about the Prince. I'm not watching Suits. I don't want anything to do with it. I'm out. I'm out on Britain.
I think actually at this point, watching Suits would be an act of defiance.
I think it would.
The royals.
I think it would. That's the government pushing pro-UK propaganda on us. Suits. It's everywhere. It's showing up on Netflix all over the place. They say it's because of the writer's strike. I'm thinking it's deeper than that.
It's got to be. I wanted to, real quick, before we drop off, I want to ask about two things that I noticed that they did in this movie. One of them is very similar to what we saw in Oppenheimer. One of them is very different from what we saw in Oppenheimer. Number one, I want to know what you think about the time jumps in this movie. And number two, I want to know what you thought about their depiction of the massacre, which was, I mean, again, arresting, horrible, awful, jaw-dropping. But the decision that they made in this movie to show it in grisly, graphic detail, whereas in Oppenheimer, there's been a lot of discussion about the decision not to show Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we do see Oppenheimer's reactions to photos of the event.
I think. What was it? Wait, what was the first part? I'll react to the
time jumps.
Time jumps. The time jumps were tough for me. I liked them as much as I hated them. In general, I don't like backtracking. But again, I think this is why I would have been better off if I'd known the history of this man and this time period in India, because this was all new information to me. So when they're jumping around, going back, I mean, in general, going back in time after you've already progressed so far is useless. It's weak storytelling, I think. It's just, I don't know. We've already progressed in the plot. Why are you backtracking when you can just keep continuing the story and reveal these things in other ways? But if I'm comparing this to Bahubali, I think they did similar things where they were cutting back and forth between timelines. And
I think they just do the one big jump, right?
Maybe they just do the one big jump. I thought there were other. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Dude, Bahubali just straight up would not have worked the other way around.
But Bahubali starts in one timeline and then it ends in the past, right? It ends with a fight in the past. And in that way, I thought it was similar, where you spend this whole time following the present, I guess, which is Udham going through the trial, shooting the guy, being tortured, and all of that. And then through that, we're jumping back in time, ultimately to the biggest time jump, which is the massacre itself. So I like structurally that is at the end of the movie, because it's incredibly powerful by the time you get to that. And you've been watching him getting tortured and you've seen all these things he sacrificed for. And then ultimately they show you the source of all this anguish for him in an absolutely brutal way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was incredibly powerful and I appreciated it. The time jumps, it makes sense for this movie, but I hate that format in general. I don't like time jumps. What about you?
Right.
Were you in there? You loved it? Indifferent?
It was most effective for me when he was being tortured, he was being interrogated, and we were getting flashes back to all the nice moments that he had, you know, his relationship with Reshma. Oh my God, dude. Even thinking about the happy times now, it just guts you. But to see that, I mean, it really did a great job of providing motivation, and it makes the act of killing O'Dwyer seem like a total no-brainer. It seems like the absolute most understandable thing in the world, because my God. So it's extremely effective in that way. But I do agree that at the beginning of the movie, it was a little bit jarring, but I think, again, I'm right there with you. I think it's just because of our lack of familiarity with the events.
Yeah. it's powerful to see them talking about a subject for so long, and then to actually see it and have it be like, still be like, oh, holy shit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great. It's great movie making. It's really good. I liked all the acting. And if we're going to stick to just talking about the way the movie's structured, I liked a lot of the acting. The main guy grew on me. Vicky. Oh, I'm so bad at all these names.
I think it's Vicky Kaushal.
Vicky Kaushal. He grew on me. At first, I wasn't crazy about him, but by the end, I felt very invested.
Yeah.
He was just so subdued the whole time. It also took me a minute to figure out which one was what, because they're switching back and forth between him wearing a full beard and having his face covered, and then they switch to him like wearing a hat and like scruff, and then he's like clean shaven and no hat in this other thing. And it was, and for a second I was like, this is all the same guy, right? Like, we're sure. Like, just each transformation looked so different to me, and they really are like completely different time periods. Like him in the snow with the beard and the hair and just like passing out and getting picked up, that looked so crazy. And he's going on this journey, and they just have that shot of him out in the ice and there's just nothing around him.
Oh my God.
And he chooses to go that way. Like, from there, I was like, so this means everything to him. This is his whole driving force. There's a lot of powerful stuff in this, man. It's really powerful.
Yeah. Part of the changes is the fact that he embodies where he's at in that character's journey so well, where you really feel it. Like when he's younger, he's with Rushmore, he's got like a lot more like energy to him. And then, I mean, by the time he gets to England in the 30s, he's just like, you can just tell that this guy is like hollowed out. Like he's just so haunted.
And I couldn't tell any of the British guys apart. I had no idea who was. I was like, I have no clue. One guy's interrogating him, and then another guy comes in and he's like, I'm going to be your lawyer. And it's like, oh, you're meeting him I thought you were interrogating him like 5 minutes. I was like, I have no idea who all these guys are. I didn't recognize. I mean, I think maybe that's why it helps to have some recognizable actors, that they stick with you a little bit more. But someone who wasn't familiar with this cast at all, man, just so many old British guys. I got the Dwyers or Dyers confused a few times. Yeah, I mean, maybe that even works. I mean, it's just like a faceless entity.
Yeah,
that is weighing down and dismissing this thing that was ultimately. I don't think the movie works unless we get that zoomed in, like, view of the massacre, like really bringing it home, because there's so much time spent about it from like a macro level, zoomed out as like a report. You know, it's talked about like a line of text, and then to actually see it and to look back on all these British guys who are acting in a typical heroic action movie role to defend an action that is so awful it's shocking. Great movie. I don't even want to rank it because I don't want to say that John Wick's better, but
well, it's a completely different kind of movie from the rest of the things. I think it's a completely
different. This is not what we do, but I'm glad we did it. And I mean, I loved it. I'm glad we did it. This is great. Great suggestion.
It's super cool. Great rec. Shajit Sharkar, great director. Vicky Kaushal. You know, I saw that this lost out on being nominated for Best Foreign Film at the Oscars. Ridiculous. Oscars, Academy, what are you doing?
You have to look at those other movies, I guess. Yeah, it must have been amazing.
Yeah, we'll just start an entire like separate prestige podcast.
I don't want to do that.
Prestigious for 30.
Don't make me do that.
It's coming.
One was enough.
Sorry.
This got me through the year. All right.
It's just going to be you getting progressively more exhausted, having to reckon with things that aren't just superheroes punching each other and Godzilla v Kong.
I don't. I want to turn my brain off and be taken away from here. That's what I want. I want fun. Recommend a fun movie. I guess whatever. I want a fun rec next time.
I think we've gotten a lot of, I think like our next recommended movie that we'll get to at some point is, we know we got to do Police Story for the Hong Kong movies. We got to do Chungking Express. Ego the Fly has been recommended a ton. That looks like a super fun movie. So we got a lot. There's a lot in the basket still.
Yeah. And that Donnie Yen Face Off movie.
Oh my God. Yeah. We got to check that out.
It's going to be exciting.
Wow. So much more. Well, hey, did you also watch it? Let us know what you thought. Drop us a comment, send us an email, nerdy430@gmail.com. We'll be back here next week with something. We haven't picked our September movies yet, but we will let you know. And until then, everybody, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy. Bye.